8.
Well, good morning. It's 07:02 on Monday, the 26th of July, and we have a special meeting of the SELCO Commission today to discuss the SELCO Power Supply Policy Roadmap to Net Zero. And I'll call the meeting to order. And Mr. Roy, is Jackie going to be our presenter this morning? Yeah, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, all right.
Jackie.
So at the June meeting, we talked about why we need a power supply policy and sort of the factors are at play here. And our team, the Integrated Resources team, myself, Ralph, Patrick, and Chris, put together a pretty straightforward power supply policy that meets the state requirements for establishing a greenhouse gas emission standard and puts us on track to meet net zero emissions in alignment with what we're hearing from customers on our most recent survey. And it also establishes clear framework for us as we work towards future power supply contracts, as well as how we purchase and retire environmental attributes, whether it's the RECs or the EFECs, as they pertain to reaching that net zero carbon goal. So the policy that we've proposed was like I said, pretty straightforward and brief. You folks have had that sent over to you in the commission package. And after we talk about sort of what's behind it, certainly we can dive into the policy. You guys can ask us questions. But it balances customer desires by achieving the net zero emissions ahead of schedule, at a reasonable cost, and with consideration given to other carbon reduction measures, such as enhanced efficiency measures and rate design. And, you know, as I said, we're currently in flight with a customer survey. And the customer priorities tend to be reliability, cost, emissions reduction, and environmental promotion, like promoting environmentally sound practices. So the actual roadmap that we're proposing here is starting with the 2020 baseline. We had about 37% carbon-free power based on that S9 definition versus the old MLP definition. And our goal for 2021 is going to be to go to 45% carbon-free power. And from there, we looked at just increasing that percentage by 5% each year with reaching 100% net zero by 2032. That's where it lands us with that 5% addition each year. And the way we're going to do this is retiring Class 1 RECs that we have associated with power contracts. We're going to continue to sell the SRECs because they're a pretty high value and use the funding that we receive for that to purchase mass Class 1 or similar RECs. And then we're going to seek new power purchase agreements that include the REC components in them going forward. And we'll purchase and retire Class 1 or Class 2 NEPOOL RECs, which are New England-based, to offset other emitting sources. We took a look at the numbers. It worked closely with MWEC to project anticipated REC pricing. And the model that we have here, their numbers were pretty good out through 2022. After that, the REC markets get a little bit fuzzier to determine. But when we started running the numbers, and Patrick did a lot of work on this, you know, the customer impact to getting to net zero by 2032 is about $5.62 more per month for the average customer using 750 kilowatt hours. When we looked at trying to stretch it out a little bit further to 2040 or 2050, because there was a little bit more volatility in the market and more folks are trying to buy limited REC resources, we feel that we may actually incur additional costs by waiting to purchase those RECs. So it also doesn't factor in the impact of combining the REC purchases with our power supply, which could reduce this further. So it's a pretty good model. I don't know if anybody has any questions on this chart. There's a little bit of a change between 21 and 22. The REC prices are projected to go down next year a little bit, and then they bounce back in 2023. So that's what that anomaly is in year 2. But overall, you know, when we compare this to, for example, our Greenlight program, our Greenlight program is the voluntary $5 a month, and you retire 1,500 kilowatt hours a year of renewable power on your behalf. You know, it costs $5 a month, and you're only getting 1,500 kilowatt hours attributed to you. With this, you're looking at $562 a month out in 2032, 11 years from now, and it's 100% of your power carbon free. So cost comparatively, this is a pretty solid approach. So this is looking at the baseline 2021 power costs. So this is our bill today with the added rec costs on top. I mean, power supply is gonna fluctuate over time, but when we attribute the rec costs to our current bill, and compare it to Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil, the IOUs, the investor-owned utilities, our cost in 2032 is still about half of what you pay today in any of those investor-owned territories. There is a slightly more expensive model if we want to enter into longer-term locked rec pricing. It does increase the cost a little bit. In 2032, the differential is minor. It goes from $96.99 a month to $97.07. But in the earlier years, it would be a quicker escalator to lock those prices in. And then we had talked about, overall, all utilities are going to experience increased costs associated with retiring RECs and attaining new EFECs as we're reaching this roadmap to net zero. So we just took a look at where we would fall in the big picture of all the utilities in Massachusetts. So we're looking at today's prices, Q1 2021, for all of the utilities in Massachusetts for 750 kilowatt hours. And we've got our rate today is fifth from the bottom. And if we look at our 2032 rate compared to everybody else today, imagining that they don't incur any additional costs, and we're still, bottom 10, which to me is top 10, right? Because we've got among the lowest rates in the whole state. I would anticipate everybody else will be seeing some additional costs as we move forward with this, which would push our position in the pack even lower. So when we talk about how we're doing this and why we're doing this, we took a look at the customer priorities. At the last meeting, I went over the results that we had from our survey from 2019. We're currently in flight with the survey right now. And we had some preliminary results. Typically, the survey covers about 300 telephone survey completions and a couple hundred online. So when we got this data, it was really for just the first 170 telephone responses. So it's not the full survey sample size, but it gives us a good general direction of where this is going. I will say that last time, the telephone responses skewed a little older, I believe, which means maybe a little bit more conservative in the responses you see here. So when we factor in the full picture, these numbers might be even higher. Hard to anticipate how people will answer online.
And Jackie, my understanding is that we split up the survey so that this is just electric.
Correct.
And so when people have responded, they can talk all they want about cable, but it's not going to be recorded until it's
Right, we're going to do a cable internet survey in the fall. It is, what we did last time around in 2019 was we separated it into two surveys. We found that to be more effective because we could dive deeper into really important issues like
agree.
this. So that it can help guide our strategy and policy on both sides of the business without trying to cut the interaction with customers short on either one.
Thank you.
So what we're seeing right now is 66% of customers want us to be somewhat or very aggressive in reducing carbon emissions, and that's up from 48% in 2019. So you can see the trend there. Last time around, 32% of customers ranked emissions reduction first or second priority. Now it's 37%, so that's also trending upwards. Reliability is still the #1 concern for customers, followed by cost and followed by emissions reduction. When we look at our preferences, we did ask customers how they feel about different carbon-free resources, because there are different costs associated with them. Whereas with nuclear, we have EFECs, and hydro, wind, and solar, we get RECs. It was important for us to kind of have some perspective. So, we have favorable, neutral, and unfavorable. All of them, when you factor in neutral or favorable, are over 50%, with the most popular one being hydro, in terms of folks feeling the best and having the most positive sentiment about it. And then we ask customers how quickly we should reach net zero carbon emissions. So 57% said 2050 was fine with them. 12% said 2040 to 2045. And surprisingly, 31% said they'd like to do it in 2035 or sooner. So we feel with the way we've balanced the cost and the approach to attaining these RECs to get to net zero in 2032, we're ahead of people's expectations, and we're still balancing that reliability, the cost, and the environmental components. 96% of our customers believe we're effectively balancing environmental stewardship with fiscal responsibility, and I think this power supply policy is a really good example of how we proactively do that. 69% of customers agree that we're doing enough today to reduce carbon emissions, and that's just based on the 35% carbon-free power we estimated in 2020. Those numbers pretty much remained unchanged from the 2019 survey. Where we did see a little bit of a bump is 79% of customers say it's very or somewhat important for us to promote environmentally conscious practices. Last time around, that was 75%. So you can see these environmental questions that we're asking, whether it be emissions or just general, how do you feel about these things? They're going up. That's the upward trend that we're seeing. And we saw a little bit of that at town meeting as they passed that climate warrant article. So we feel that this policy that we presented to you folks is really in alignment with customer desires, and we're still maintaining, you know, that SELCO theme of good service, fair price. So that's the presentation portion, Bob. I don't know if you want to dig into the policy itself. I can pull that up on screen, or if you just want to work from the sheets that folks have there in front of you.
Well, let's see if anybody has any questions as far as what's going on, what's been presented thus far. Anything? By the way, this is a good opportunity to welcome Mr. Matt Beaton as the new member of the SELCO Commission. Kelly Marshall stepped down for family reasons. We hope to potentially see her back in some capacity in the future. Matt has stepped up to the plate and been appointed by the town manager to be our fifth commission member, and thank you for joining us, Matt. Any questions on what Jackie's presented thus far? If not?
I have a question about the recs. Now, you try to explain it a little bit more. I know you say it's one kind of rec, and then it's an N rec, or S rec, whatever.
Sure. So, I mean, Chris, I don't know, do you want to hop in on that, or?
Sure, I can.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do it too.
Yeah, no, you've been talking a lot as well.
Sure.
So I'll happy to give you a break. So yes, there are a variety of different rec options out there. So you have the class, you know, I guess to even summarize that plethora of options a little bit further, you have the class 1s, you have class 2s. Those correspond to different types of generating resources, and they also are defined slightly differently depending on the states. But for argument's sake, I guess you can think of class 1s as your like wind, or even your a bunch of solar. You could throw that in there, absent of SRECs, because eventually SRECs will then transform into these class 1 recs. And then class 2s, generally speaking, I think of those as hydro. But there are other classes out there, and then in here we tried to specify that they are New England recs, because you could go out and buy Texas recs or North Carolina recs, but generally speaking, you know, that doesn't necessarily accomplish the overall intent, which is to supply the renewable energy investment in this area.
What's the S rec? What is that?
So solar rec.
That's just, oh, solar. That's S rec. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, and these classes it has a mass in front of it, so those are the ones that specifically align themselves with the latest and greatest as far as the state's policies going forward, correct?
Correct.
Can you just explain, though, it's not just a classification of recs, but a little deeper than that, what the rec market is, and
Sure.
how a rec gets created, and what gets exchanged? You know, what are we really doing?
Sure. So that kind of just then referencing the structure of the policy itself. Folks may be familiar with, we manage a portfolio similar to an investment portfolio with a variety of energy resources. So, you know, engaging in conversations with the general public, they're familiar with buying solar, wind, you know, natural gas, to throw in some of the other fuel types. And so we try and buy, you know, a layered and diverse model in terms of energy procurement. But then there's also other portfolios in that similar vein, which is capacity. And same type of thing, the capacity type of commodity, if you will, is traded in the same manner as energy. And then now we've added a third component, which is RECs. And I would think, so the REC market was established as basically a mechanism. So you build, let's just use the traditional example of solar. there was a time when you built a solar array and it created electrons. Well, now through this REC market that was created, you have now an energy component that you procure as part of a contractual obligation, or if you own it, you just get it. But you can buy the energy, the kilowatt hour output, but you also have this environmental attribute that one REC is minted per megawatt hour of generation. And so then now this allows folks to develop these resources to not only engage in a transaction for the energy component, but now there's this transaction for the environmental attribute. So the analogy I've used as well is, and I'm always looking to try and get better ones, but is similar to, say, buying a house. You could buy the house and you get the house, but this would be akin to, say, there's a market for deeds. So if you buy your house and you live in your house, but then you sell someone else the deed, well, it's not really your house, but you're in it. And so, here it's, you're buying, the energy, and to truly count that energy as your energy, you need that REC. But you can sell it for the financial incentive, but you can't make the certain claims once you've sold that off.
And Tony, the SREC costs are really, really high. They sell for quite a bit of money. So in this model, to try and balance that cost perspective in there, our approach is to sell these very high-value SRECs and then take the money that we get from them and buy Class 1 or Class 2 NEPL RECs, which will essentially get us more RECs for the money. Better bang for your buck.
Well, it also aligns us with a state policy, right? By doing that, by getting the Class 1, mass Class 1 and 2 versus just having the SRECs, because the mass ones actually count more on that regard as far as the state policy goes? Yes or no? I'm sorry.
I'd say as far as the most recent legislation, both are counted equally.
Okay.
And so that's where I think we can take advantage of that flexibility. Yep. And eventually, the SRECs do turn into Class 1 RECs, so we're just kind of.
How about, to bring it home, Matt and I were fortunate enough when they did the commissioning of the solar site down in the landfill. What RECs does that generate, and who owns those?
So that generates SRECs today, and those are being sold on the market by SELCO. So what we would do is continue that, and then we're going to use the money that we get for that to purchase Class 1 and Class 2. However, as Chris mentioned, there's a sunset for this SREC program, right? At some point, those are no longer going to be called SRECs or sold as SRECs. They're going to be minted as Class 1 mass RECs. And at that point, under this policy, I believe we would retire them instead. Because why sell them and go out and buy more of them? So that's kind of the strategy where we're leveraging the high value in those early years and then transitioning to just owning the environmental attribute when it drops to that Class 1 status.
Okay, now.
I see some problem, excuse me, of, you've got like a limited amount of physical plant or whatever you want to call it, and you got all these RECs. And it seems like it's a financial thing. All I can see is inflation with this thing. It's like you got this many, but you're selling all these other RECs, and they're really, are we fooling ourselves thinking we've got all this energy, free energy, or not free energy, but
Well, so yeah, the electrons are separate from the environmental attribute. Like the power is the power, right? Like our power supply itself is covering our needs. That's a whole strategy to make sure that, like Chris said, we're balancing our portfolio and we've got, contracts that meet our customer needs, whether we're buying on the market or locking into contracts. Then we have to account for all of those resources that we have on the power supply side need to get to net zero, right? So how do we do that? We're either buying a contract that includes both the energy and the RECs. So say we buy some offshore wind in the future. We would make sure that that contract includes both the environmental attribute and the power, right? So we've got both of these threads running through it. But in other instances, we have existing contracts or we're getting from other generation sources that we need to offset because there is no REC attribute associated with this. So then that is us going out on this market and we're going to buy main Class 2s, or we're going to buy mass Class 1s, or we're going to see what we can find to match up against energy contracts that we have where we haven't secured a REC in conjunction with that. So to your point, Tony, one of the reasons that we're talking about doing this by 2032 is, as more people are coming into this market to try and reach that net zero by 2050, there is a limited resource on RECs. So there's going to be high competition, potentially high costs to attain those RECs that you need to cover your power supply, right, as a utility. And as we discussed at the last meeting, it's not just utilities buying these RECs. A lot of corporations are buying these RECs because they're trying to green their operations. So these are environmental offsets for their business activities. So we feel that by going through this approach and getting us to net zero in 11 years instead of 29 years, over this time following the power supply policy, we'll be entering into these contracts that include both of those components. We'll be able to enter into longer-term REC contracts so we can secure and know that those resources are there for us because we've signed on for them. Do you want to add anything to that, Chris?
If I may, just add. So, just building on that a little, I figured maybe it would be helpful if I add some of the, operational considerations that this helps with. And so, one of the things that I would find that would be a benefit to us is based on your point, is if we're always, say our target was 2050. Everyone's target is 2050. And so now we're skirting the minimums here with respect to market fluctuations, and as well as outside procurements. And so really what I think this is starting to set us on a path to do is make sure we are financially preparing to retire the REC attributes that are associated with the contracts that we purchase. And so that's where, in many of these cases, future contracts or existing contracts, we own the REC and we can decide what to do with it. And so if we're depending on that revenue to, I guess, make us whole, and all of a sudden we're just doing the minimum, then that could put us in a bind in terms of a last-minute rate increase to try and cover that if we're trying to meet these minimums.
REC doesn't have time limits on them then.
No, so this way, we're somewhat, there's any number of middle grounds, but we basically, put together the 5% adder to say, hey, if we incorporate $1 today and over the next 10 years, building that to what we forecast out to be somewhat south of $6, that will put us in a position where we won't have to rely on any last-minute type of rate increase to meet a minimum objective, whereas we can set ourselves up with a little bit of cushion to see where the markets go and eventually try and secure these contracts and control them ourselves.
We're assuming that they're gonna build all these power supplies and we're gonna, it seems like that's why it bothers me is the RECs, it's all fancy paperwork, but you still got all this physical plant that's gotta be built.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
I think that the REC market will drive some of that,
Yeah,
right?
sure,
Because,
that'll give incentive.
right, there's value in selling those environmental attributes.
Yeah.
That's the intent, yeah.
But, part of this whole plan relies upon, in the out years, conservation as much as it does construction, right? Because we can't keep up with the pace of usage, unless people start conserving themselves, i.e. becoming more, my point of having been on the Beal Reuse Committee was making sure that we have as we build projects that are gonna be in town for 30, 40, 50 years, as to how energy efficient are they gonna be and how do we, decrease the demand for electricity or try to tap it down. The other part is, how fast is electric vehicles gonna come into effect where, the demand for electricity is gonna be that much higher too. So where does that all fit into your proposal here?
Right,
And
so,
have heat pumps and all too in the
right,
houses,
so,
that's
so
gonna be-
electrification is actually, could drive increased kilowatt hour sales, right? So building efficiency is gonna be super important, and as, new technologies are developed, even though they may rely primarily on electricity for transportation or for home heating, they're going to have to be more efficient, to your point. But that said, as people are seeking to fuel shift, whether it's with their vehicles going from a gasoline car to an electric vehicle, or from oil or gas heating system in their home to an energy efficient heat pump, us as the utility getting to net zero on an accelerated timeline like this helps really bolster those areas so that when they're shifting from those resources to electricity, like that energy truly is net zero. Like that is the greener solution because we're offsetting any emissions through these rec purchases and retirements. And that's how we're all gonna get there as a team. So it's really important that sort of we go first to make it work.
Okay. But part of that too is we have to coordinate, I think, with the rest of the town administration as far as whether it be building code and whatnot for the outfit, which we don't address, we just provide the power, but it is kind of to make this thing all work, we're gonna have to have the other departments as well assisting.
And I think that there's good collaboration between SELCO and the town. And I would say that as we move forward with our integrated resources department, our intent is to try and, keep those lines of communication open and become that sort of technical resource as they're developing different strategies and policies and whether it's building codes or they're looking at new construction for XYZ reason, economic development, that's where we're gonna try and help guide the conversation as it relates to energy, so.
If I may add one more comment to that one too, just a quick maybe opinion, if you could classify it as that. The foundation for these broader climate objectives are reliant on the energy sector serving as the foundation for this transition away from transportation and heating platforms, relying on fossil fuels, being gasoline, oil heat, natural gas heat, things like that. And so the notion of having the energy supply, hit these targets at an accelerated pace allows these other platforms an opportunity to transition to electricity as the energy source that can provide these lower emissions. And then coupled with that is the fact that, back to the point about buildings and other future projects in Shrewsbury and beyond, is that, folks are used to trying to go to a net zero building or a LEED certified building because they're trying to get their one project that they have control over, compliant with whatever, energy objectives they're trying to achieve. Whereas, and into that classification, not to go down this path too far, but there are different levels of net zero certifications. And so this is a new way of looking at it as well, as rather than trying to get individual homes and buildings to be net zero and eventually maybe they all transition, is if we can get everyone to electrify and the underlying power source is emissions free, then you basically have a net zero community everywhere. And so you're not reliant on existing buildings to make that transition on a one-for-one basis. This is, if you have, for argument's sake, if you have electric strip heat, heat pumps are definitely more efficient, but say you're in an existing home, right? Because we want to hit all these different demographics. And you might have electric heat if that is powered by the SELCO energy of 2032, you'll be in a net zero home. So that's some of the underlying motivation, in my opinion.
Yeah, the more you can get folks to convert from gas heat or regular fuel, oil, and bring in electric, you start. That's a huge jump in making a house net zero in and of itself. But okay, well, with all that.
May I?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Just on this last one, because, if this is what every SELCO meeting is like, I'm not gonna be a very happy guy for my first one, because this is sort of my wheelhouse of a conversation and really enjoy this. But specific to the electrification, I have a lot to say on this, but I won't say it all. But specific to the electrification, you actually do more harm than good if you don't get yourself as quickly as possible to net zero, because the overall carbon profile of making the fuel switch without having the backing of clean energy generation is actually worse than just continuing to drive a gas vehicle. So it's actually the inverse. So it's great to have this accelerated thing. And I will say that looking through the numbers, I would love at some point to just dig into the assumptions, because I think, Tony, you raised some really good points. Is if the infrastructure isn't there and the energy generation isn't there, it's all for naught. And what it really is it's gonna become supply and demand, and it's gonna be more costly than originally thought forward. But I think that supports, however, the more aggressive timeline that you presented. I think it's super smart for the exact reasons that you said of everybody's gonna be rushing to do this. The whole world is talking about this, like literally every single thing I do right now today is trying to support other utilities and other, entities similar to a SELCO to try to understand what is your pathway to do it. And I think this is I'm very encouraged to see this. And the most encouraging thing to me is the impact to the ratepayer. I, been doing this stuff for 15 years, like, I honestly haven't seen numbers pencil out this way that it's pretty remarkable to see the plan and to see the thought that went into this, because the magnitude of the impact on the ratepayer out to year 2032 is
Negligible.
It's negligent.
Really,
It's
yeah.
wildly impressive, actually, from things that I've seen in the past. So I know you said, who did you work with on the model, Jackie?
So
MWEC?
is our joint action agency that helps us with our power supply planning and contracts, and
And they work with
They're-
all mass
Yep.
municipal power.
their analytical
I know them
team
well
provided
from,
all kinds of
the-
projections. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, I get, it's just, really, Patrick did a lot of legwork on this, and Ralph got checked in on a lot of it. I mean, Chris provided, like, this was a whole teamwork effort. I just want to be super clear, like, Patrick worked with MWIC on it. It's pretty
Yeah.
great.
Because I would just love to just understand a little bit more at some time, over time, just some of the assumptions on even, the generation portfolio, what that looks like based off of sort of
Yeah, it's a good question.
where we
Yeah.
are. Because that'll ultimately dictate a lot of that cost number, I think.
From your point of view now, if we need more transmission lines, you always have terrible time getting the resistance and all. Is the state gonna if they're mandating all the stuff, are they at some point gonna have to do some eminent domain to do this?
That is a sage question right
Sage.
there, Tony.
Well,
Is
that
like
seems the big one, yeah.
But again, that also supports let's get there faster than anybody
Right,
else.
right.
Because that is ultimately gonna be the bottleneck for the industry. 'Cause
Right.
You're not gonna be able, there's only so much land, there's only so many, places to put this stuff.
Right,
The large majority of this is not gonna be in Shrewsbury, right? So where's it coming from? It's gotta get from point A to point B.
Right.
Everybody's looking for it, then all of a sudden, everybody's electrifying. The volume that we're talking is going to accelerate dramatically over the next, certainly decade, 2 decades. And to be a first actor in that effort and be locked in at some of that pricing is incredibly wise. Because everybody's gonna be trying to get there, and the bottleneck is going to be the transmission and all of those ancillary costs. I would even say, in a lot of the out-year models aren't built in. That cost is not built into a lot of this, they're looking at it from here.
Right.
So I think, in the timeline that we're talking here, I think it avoids a lot of that. I don't think it avoids all of it, but it definitely lessens the blow.
we'd be ahead of it, right?
Yeah,
We're
we'd be
leading
ahead of it.
edge. That's-
So I'll say a couple things on that. So first off, we ran the numbers, and Patrick looked at increasing our actual power supply needs in some of these out years. And the way we've broke it down is the impact per kilowatt hour. So regardless of sort of how many megawatt hours we sell in a year, we're still gonna need to purchase the RECs. So the cost per kilowatt hour to our customers hopefully should be pretty spot on. Like when we increase by X%, that sort of remained the same on the per kilowatt hour sales. We can definitely share those, back end assumptions that we've got there. But the other real benefit to establishing the power supply policy is that we're gonna look at it every single year, right? So if something's trending or changing and we've got concerns, we can adjust on the fly, right? Like we can also kind of do this look every year to see, is it holding? Were our assumptions right? How do we feel about the out years on this? Do we need to adjust the model and take another look at what we think the impact might be to customers in 3 years or 5 years or 8 years or 10 years, So I think, this isn't a set it and forget it. This is an ongoing conversation. I mean, this is a thread that's gonna run throughout, to your point, every commission meeting that you're gonna be having. This is a reality of what we are going to need to take into consideration as just the course of doing business.
Well, Tony, one of the things you talked about was resistance. One is
Yeah.
the political resistance, because
Right.
nobody, the NIMBY, we don't want it in our
Right,
backyard.
right.
The other part is the actual physical resistance on these lines, these transmission lines, where a lot of power is lost.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And that's why in the town here, and I think you've been very proactive with your team, of we're going to a much higher voltage.
Yeah, the 13.8,
Lineage, as people in their neighborhood see not only fiber going in, but also big transition, and in fact, I think it came up Maple Ave recently for you, right? They're bringing up the higher voltage so that we lose less energy due to heat because of the high voltage and whatever, I don't want to go down that road. But bottom line is, that's what needs to be done as well nationwide, and I think that's part of what's the budget and what's in the infrastructure and what's going on as to whether or not the transmission lines themselves are gonna be jacked up even higher, so the voltage is there, so. But to get to back to what you're talking about, the town, I think, has already been in the lead of taking a look at that we're not going with the old infrastructure, we're upgrading so that we can bring in more power and lose less of it as we do so.
But just going back to your other question, it's maybe slightly off topic to specific to Shrewsbury, but you mentioned, is the state gonna intervene? And it's a really complicated question, because especially when you ponder us being part of, us, Massachusetts, being in ISO New England, we're sort of a land-strapped state, relatively speaking, for the percentage of load that we have in the region. So we need to work with other partners outside, other partner states, right? And how do we get that electricity from here to there? Perfect example, in Massachusetts, we're trying to import through Canada via Maine. And just look what one line in a pre-existing corridor does to the NIMBYism aspect of, yes, it's gonna be carrying all carbon-free electrons, that's everything everybody wants, just put it over there, not over here, right? That transmission line in an existing corridor, right? So it's, that is only going to get worse and worse. And even with offshore wind, right, we're starting to see, hopefully very soon, the development of, these large offshore wind, but each one of those projects is gonna have its own transmission line.
Then it's got a
Making
land,
sure-
that's right, it's got a land, so I got a place down in Falmouth, I can hear them now, they'll probably be screaming and all, oh, you're not gonna put it, not over there, not near that
Definitely.
beach.
Right, and so there's this conversation, should there be one large sort of shared trunk?
Yeah.
That's kind of how they do it in Europe. We don't have that model here, there's been no buy-in from the developers to wanna go that route, so, I mean, this is the debate going on out there that's ultimately
Well,
gonna
that's what I
dictate
see
if
as the
everybody
big
can get
problem.
there. Yeah,
That's,
100%.
Well, interesting. And so when do we think we're gonna build our second solar site down at the?
yeah, right.
To keep up with this demand, no, that's a separate issue.
So does anybody have any other questions on the policy itself? Do you guys feel comfortable making,
Can you take me through just 2021? I see you got the 37% baseline. Just take me through these numbers, because I'm confused on, I see the $5 customer charge, I see the $91, but then in the end, it's only $92, and I'm a little confused on how that math,
yeah, so
what
you're,
that is.
this chart right here, that's up on the screen, is that what we're?
Yeah, the roadmap proposal.
Okay, so, what we have is we're starting with the 2021 baseline cost. This is our kilowatt hour cost today to customers who use 750 kilowatt hours a month. And what we took a look at was the anticipated added cost of these rec retirements to get, that's what the blue line is, the added cost of the recs, on top of what our baseline cost for power is today, okay? So when we look at year one, to get to 45% of net zero, the added monthly cost to a customer using 750 kilowatt hours is $1.08. Okay, so over the course of the year, that adds just shy of $13 to their total 2021 bill, right? Which, when we look at 2022, it actually goes down a little bit. And the reason for that is the rec market's anticipated to drop a little bit next year, but then it rebounds. And in 2023, we're looking to lock in some additional contracts, which having contracted power requires us to account for that in our rec offsets, which is why you see that go up from 104 to 204, because A, the rec prices are a little bit higher, and B, we're locking contracts down for power rather than being on the market with some of that. And then, it increases each year, so that's the added cost impact per month to customer.
Why is the line customer charge $5 there on everything? 'Cause
That's our-
that's what's throwing
Yeah,
me.
that's our customer charge. So that's part of our billing right now. It used to be $2.90. You guys voted to increase that. Was last year, the year before, last year I think. And that's the cost of service, right? So that's to have your meter read, and for the billing support, like that's just a regular line item on your bill. That's the regular customer charge you pay today. Whether you use 0 kilowatt hours or 7,000, that's, as a residential customer, you pay $5 a month.
It's having no impact on this analysis.
Correct, but it's just showing you what's going into that total monthly bill.
I guess having that line there kind of throws this a bit, because it almost looks like there's some math going on here, and then you see customer charge in the middle, which says $5 flat.
Yep.
But I guess that's because that's how you build into the 9137.
Yes,
Is that
yes,
what that is? So it's really, customer charge is almost rate per hour. Customer charge probably should go above.
Yep.
I see what I see that, how it gets thrown. Like it's
It could go first or last.
Yeah, the way
Sorry, that's not a multiplier. So that's
Yeah,
a
that's
flat
why.
rate that doesn't get added.
yeah.
You know, it doesn't get multiplied by your consumption. Everybody's
Yeah,
paying that.
I
flat
guess
charge.
if I would throw this chart out to the public, as in like one of the newsletters, the customer charge throws this.
So we could do the math and then throw the customer charge at the end to say what the total.
Something
Yeah.
right, it throws it.
Yep.
It throws the look of what it is we're achieving.
I just wanted to make sure, Mike, when we said it was 9137, that you could see that it wasn't 8637.
Yeah, right,
It is
then the math doesn't
9137.
work the
Yes,
other
we want to
way,
make sure you
right.
guys are accounting for that.
Right, includes the customer charge. Got it.
Okay. Any other members have any questions about policy?
One thing, I just wanted to note, right now we're at what? I'm just looking at the two numbers. Added yearly rec cost, total annual bill, in 21 today, it's like, what, 1.5% of the bill, right? Essentially the
Yeah.
cost of being 37%, carbon-free adds 3% to get us out to 2032, to be net zero as a community, would cost us 6%. And that, I mean, to me, you know, I always try to balance the cost argument with the need to get there. But to me, when you look at, you know, there's a lot of, I guess maybe controversial ways to look at it, or debatable ways, I don't want to say controversial, but debatable, of the cost of carbon and, you know, all of those types of conversations. But 6% to be carbon neutral as a community, I would like to think that if, you know, that the polls that you did are an accurate representation of how people feel about it, that is a very justifiable expenditure for us as a community to, you know, to look at. And I think, personally, I think that's a great talking point. And what I think there are ways, particularly, speaking about this to the public, to talk about, look at where we are today, 37%. Not a lot of places in the state that can say they're 37% carbon free, right? Maybe Holyoke, because they have, you know, a hydro dam, right? So it's absent those types of communities that have different resource bases, we're at a great starting point with a great trajectory, with a great message along the way of how we're going to do it. Particularly when you compare yourself, you did the rate comparison of where we fall,
Yeah.
which I think is wildly important and something SELCO should pat itself on the back for. But I also think there's another one that you could show right after this that shows the carbon, where you are from the greenhouse gas perspective, right?
good-
And say,
good
look
point.
at the balance we've
Yeah.
struck, right? And I think if you could, you know, maybe aggregate the two, I don't think you're gonna have a lot of people on the bottom of the list that are gonna be at the top of the other list, and I think SELCO's probably gonna be pretty close. That's a pretty cool story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe we ask Emwick to start accounting
great story.
for that. We need that monthly or quarterly.
Yeah.
No, you know what, and to your point on this, I mean, this is the story, right? SELCO has been very effective at providing the best service at the lowest cost and taking into account, you know, environmental costs. We're still providing great service at a low cost with this plan,
Yeah.
right? And we are keeping the theme alive of what we've been about since the beginning, and we're doing it in a very effective way, I think, with this plan. And you can see that our customers trust us to do that with that 96% or whatever it was.
Yeah.
People trust that we're gonna be balancing both the fiscal and environmental components of what it is we do here. So I agree with you, I think it's a great story.
Yeah. I mean, sorry to keep going, this is my
that's
first, so after, you know, as being a lifelong resident of Shrewsbury, but then also, you know, going up into Boston and being exposed to a lot of, it was a very eye-opening time of my life to realize
Sure.
not every community is quite as well run across the board, but even looking at SELCO, Because when you take the cost, the low cost, and I used to always beat this drum and use SELCO as an example in a lot of the conversations I would have. You have the low cost, you have this accelerated roadmap to carbon-free, and you have the reliability component. The things that would see when, post-storms and things of that nature, of restoration times, and, what's the longest outage in SELCO in recent memory for a lot of folks? It's when you look at what the standard is across the board and you look at that reliability component, I mean, it's best in class across the board. And those three main pillars of reliability, the cost, and the carbon element of it is, sort of the cornerstone of what everybody, how all territories sort of come at things. And SELCO's ability to balance those three things, honestly, I can't think of another municipal or certainly public utility that has struck the balance the way SELCO has. So it was all part of the reason why I said
Good,
I would like
yeah.
to join this commission.
Even if we told you there was no summer meetings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, at least it's one he likes.
Yeah, exactly. At least you started off on the right.
This is the first one in about 30 years.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah, did you guys want to make a motion, or do you have more
I
questions?
just want to make sure.
Well, I just think the key will be, this is pretty rosy, to be honest.
Yeah,
and
right.
so I'm almost a little skeptical because it's a little too rosy. And that's fair. I mean, if it comes out that way, it's awesome.
I have to tell you, we were pretty surprised when we
Yeah.
did the numbers too, Mike.
Yeah.
Honestly, we were like, whoa, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And that's why I want to look at the assumptions. for
Yeah,
that.
the
Exactly.
assumptions.
It's very rosy.
That's
It's a
what
great
that
story.
annual
Exactly, yeah.
callback is, right? Where we
Right.
reviewed each year.
So, if I may.
Go ahead, yes, sir.
I could add insight from two other communities that I've worked in before. We did the analysis looking on that list for Concord Light, and that came out to, and this was several years ago, a $9 full carbon neutral increase, granted for a different reason. I mean, this is rough, because different reasons they fall on these tiers. Belmont was 6. So,
Monthly, you said?
Monthly, yeah.
6 monthly, sorry, I don't know if I misspoke there, but.
No, you're-
No, just.
Yeah, so I mean, to see it, and that was right to the 100% figure, and so for us to come out at 6.
Sounded reasonable.
Met my, and there's a whole lot of variables in there, and the forecasts, the further you go out, are less reliable. But for argument's sake, with being able to leverage a mixture of Class 1 and Class 2s, because that affordability largely comes with our pathway leveraging Class 2 recs that are also not just mass. We specifically mentioned knee pool being the New England Power Pool as an ability to manage recs that might be generated in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. So that regional perspective allows us to balance in some of that affordability.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind, I think probably the last paragraph in the policy is the most important is, we're gonna look at this every year. Because as a commission, I think we gotta constantly look at, well, what is the true price increase and where are we really at? And what do we base that on? So I wouldn't mind almost an initial meeting, when you're ready to say, well, how did we even get to 37%? What does that really mean? And why are we
Yearly
there? And then, so then we have almost like a measure to that, when we understand your baseline, and then there's accountability to the baseline we all created and the assumptions we created, so that we're not constructively, a year later saying, oh, but we changed this assumption, that assumption, that's how we got to the 5%. Just so that we objectively, we know where we're really at. And then obviously on the pricing increases for more than one reason. It could be for any reason. We got to somehow objectively measure and monitor that while we're while we're kind of observing this policy. So I think that's kind of, to me, is going to be definitely an agenda item at least once a year. But I think we as a commission need a little more, without micromanaging it, as a commission need a little more education, just so that from an accountability standpoint, which is our oversight role, that we understand where we've been starting from, and we have minutes to reflect that.
I mean, and just speaking to the 37%, I mean, a lot of that comes from the EFECs, which are associated with the nuclear, which we have kind of as a pretty core baseline. And there's a little bit of other stuff going on in there with the RECs. We had shown you a chart, I think, or a breakdown at the last meeting. So that is on record from the previous commission meeting. But for sure, I like that idea of not only just the annual review of this, but what education can we do for you guys along the way to make sure that you are totally aware and familiar with all of these different components that are affecting rates. You guys represent the people of Shrewsbury, like, it's really important for you to understand it, to that oversight role as well as you can, right?
Right.
Mr. Chairman, I have one
Yes,
follow-up.
sir.
Sorry. The assumption on, certainly through 32, maybe out to 50, at what point does the nuclear profile, still learning the whole makeup of our electricity mix right now, but at what point does the model anticipate retirements of nuclear assets? Do you know?
Question. So retirement of the asset, as in the retirement of the actual facility
Decommissioning
itself?
and the whole thing?
Well, just no more ability for us to count that as carbon free. So I'm assuming, is this Seabrook? Yeah.
Seabrook and Millstone.
Millstone too.
So,
And Seabrook's been approved, I think, since 2040 or so, as far as
Oh, good.
operation goes, so I mean, it's still got long legs.
Yeah.
that was factored in with our charts that we looked at with MWIC when we were talking about our baseline. And yeah, I think it was 2040 that Seabrook goes through, is that right? Or did it go all the way to the end?
It went to the end.
Okay.
I mean, I believe the assumption is that they
anticipated.
will continue to operate
Yep.
through 2050.
Okay, if you find out any information, feed that back to,
Yeah, we can, I mean, we've got some charts we can send over.
Okay. Tony, anything else?
No,
Do you,
good.
Patrick has it? Patrick has it.
What's up, Patrick? Did I misspeak?
No.
He's got the
So,
info.
Millstone, we have megawatt hours out until 2045. And for Seabrook, 2050.
2050,
Good.
that's
Okay,
good.
so we'll see what goes.
I'll be retired.
Yeah, I'll be retired more ways
I'll
than
be-
one.
I mean, that's,
Yeah, you bet,
Pa-
yeah.
Patrick might be retired by then.
He might actually have a beard.
just to that point, I mean, just look what Connecticut did with Millstone and look at what, there's conversations and look what NextEra is looking to do with Seabrook with the threat of that line coming down from New York, dropping on their doorstep and the nodal pricing that happens there. I mean, that I don't think that technological aspect is gonna be the problem. It's gonna be the competitive financial in the market that's gonna keep those facilities afloat. So
Yep.
as more of the, the counterintuitive piece of it is we rely on that for net carbon thing, but as more of those, where the resources for renewables can be built and come from gets dropped on their doorstep,
Right.
particularly Seabrook, it's a financial threat to them more than anything else. So again, that's another thing that makes these complications
Yeah,
and
I guess.
maybe the rosiness, there's a lot of other little details that go into
Yep.
those out years,
Well, new
particularly
plants across
10
the
years
country
out.
have had to shut down because it's just not economically viable, and that's part of the congressional will take a look at how do they support that. The companies that are not making a profit, if they're making profit, they probably don't need the money, but they're gonna say, well, why don't we get it as
Yeah.
well?
That's
It'd be
right.
tough to give a subsidy to NextEra right now.
Yeah. So anyways, with that said, good.
Yeah.
Tony, you're all set?
I'm all set.
Do we have a motion to accept and approve the power supply policy, which has been presented today with the proposal that we would be 100% net zero by 2032?
So moved. Yeah.
Okay, Tony, so moved and
Second.
second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? No? Okay, well, let's accept it on the policy. Just a couple of quick admin things I'd like to go over. One, Jackie, in your bailiwick, I filled out my paperwork because I went and bought an electric, a battery-powered trimmer.
Yeah.
And I found on the website that there's a site that, and I'll let you take it from there as to,
So we launched the electric yard equipment rebate June, and we've had some activity. We're actually working to partner with Papa's Hardware to do a shop local and get the rebate opportunity. So hopefully in the next couple weeks, we'll have an announcement on that, an opportunity for customers to save even more. So it's really great. You can get electric lawnmower, push mower, weed whacker, leaf blower,
chainsaw.
chainsaw, pole saw, was there another one? Maybe a rototiller? Yeah.
Got a
So
rototiller.
quite a few. And you know what's really cool about these is you know, when you think about like your electric drill and your circular saw where they have the interchangeable batteries, the yard tools have gone in that direction as well. So you have the one battery that you can plug into all these different tools. And it's really convenient. They work really well. The feedback that I've gotten from a couple customers is they love them. So,
Is there retroactive? Is there any particular date?
so it was, if you purchased by June 1st, but, you know, I think we made an exception or two for people
That's
who
the
purchased
earliest you
in
could
May.
purchase it.
If you purchased it in 2019, there's no no retroactive.
I know you're saving
we
your
gotta-
seat, Tony.
we
I
gotta
got-
I got a
bless that
couple
as
there. I
well.
gotta look,
But, yeah, if it was within a month or so of us launching it, we'll
And
make
it
the
goes
exception.
through into next year.
So as of right now, we just launched it, and we anticipate keeping it as part of our regular rebate.
How
this
much is the rebate?
Well, MWIC, in my case, mine was just a leaf trimmer, or a grass trimmer. It was $25.
Yeah, so it varies by equipment
But
type,
yeah.
and we're hoping to stand up some snowblower rebates this fall to be ready for the winter
I
season.
throw that out there,
so.
and then additionally, as you upgrade, because as I did, the reason I was buying another one is I already had a battery-powered one, but seeing that the company, the Home Depot where I was purchasing from, had done away with the Ego or whatever it was, this brand, they were willing to accept the lithium batteries that you
Oh,
can
good, yeah.
recycle those. And that's a big thing I'd like to point out
Yeah.
as well to the public, is those batteries are fairly robust, and they shouldn't be put in any sort of refuse at the end of your driveway or whatnot, and they should be recycled. And these companies that sell electric appliances are responsible, and they are being
Take 'em back,
responsive. As I saw at Home Depot, they were more than willing to accept it. They actually have a box to put it in a bag and it gets in. But so just to keep the environmentalist. Okay, enough on the advertisement on the yard work, which I'm trying to avoid this week. One thing I'd just like to take a moment. There's an employee who passed away recently, Ann Trainer, I believe, and she'd been with us for a number of years. She'd retired, so she's been out of the organization for a couple of years. But she was in charge of, at the time, personnel, payroll, and billing. And when she left, 3 people got hired to fill what she was doing. But she passed away, and so I just want to say that we're to her family and whatnot, our condolences, but also to just let the public know we probably had a lot of interaction with her during that period of time. That was a loss to the SELCO community. With that, our next meeting will be in September. The date to be determined, because we haven't done our annual with new board members coming and going. We're going to set up an annual calendar schedule, so that'll be done via email, and we'll get that. But it'll be the latter part of September. With that, any last comments or anything from any of the members? No. Again, welcome,
Yeah,
Matt. It's a
welcome,
pleasure to have you on board. And with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So
moved.
moved.
Okay,
Second.
Tony? Second, okay, and all in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Aye, okay, the meeting is adjourned at 0800.
Look at that, 1 hour, huh?
Actually, 58 minutes, but no.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good.